I'm James Woods. One of the things I think that is important to realize is that when David approached my agent, he and Pierre David, the producer, they didn't have a full script for Videodrome. I think it was only about 70 pages long. And I remember meeting David first at the Beverly Hills Hotel in Beverly Hills, California. And I had read the 70 pages with no ending and thought it was pretty terrific. I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't imagine what the ending would be like. And so our first discussion was about, do you feel comfortable, he asked me, doing a movie where you don't know the ending? I said, well, I might with some directors, but Scanners was so truly bizarre. And Rabid was, I thought, really amazing. So I said, why don't we just take a chance and go do this? I had just come off something. I can't remember where I was. I guess it was The Onion Field. And so I was just starting to get a little heat in my career. And I remember Pierre David said to me one later at dinner, which was always makes you feel good when you're an actor. He said, "We couldn't believe we got you so cheaply," which is always a nice thing to hear.
This meeting is to take place at the
Well, hi, I'm Deborah Harry, and I play Nikki in Videodrome. How did I get hired for this? I think David was intrigued with the Blondie character, and he sent me a script. Oddly enough, though, when I went to meet him for the first time, I had changed my hair color to sort of this auburn shade, and he was sort of saying, "Oh, you're not blonde. Oh." And I said, "No, I'm not." I was very fierce about it. So that's how I actually got the job.
What's really amazing is that David, if you were to meet him, and hopefully many of the viewers have seen what David looks like, he looks basically like a very circumspect, genteel country lawyer, or not a businessman so much, but maybe like a little bit more than an accountant. Very soft-spoken, very gentlemanly, lives in a lovely house in Toronto with his family. I mean, he looks like the most normal person imaginable. And I'm saying this looking at my character, looking at porn pictures here on the screen. But I said to him, "How do you come up with these really, truly bizarre ideas for these movies?" He said, I write from my dreams, that he has these strange dreams, and like we all do, I guess, from time to time. And he writes from inspirations that he gets from his dreams. And as you know, dreams, of course, have very little logic. So he has the unenviable task of putting some kind of writer's logic to the stories that are inspired by his dreams. I love that little scene where the door, we actually set that where the door catch falls off. It was like one of those little touches that we thought was important. And I love this guy's outfit. He was so serious.
A little bit. How many shows you got?
13, with a possibility of another 6 if the sales go well.
You got cassettes?
Of course.
Now, the irony is that you try to see this movie in terms of modern day technology, and everything's about cassettes, of course, in the movie, and everything's analog and oftentimes black and white televisions and so on. And yet it is incredibly prescient in terms of the influence of video and the impact it has had on our lives, and how the video flesh becomes a reality, etc., and how people are looking for the edge continually, and in the kinds of movies and television that we do. I mean, there was some discussion about having an execution, a sanctioned, state-sanctioned execution be aired on American television recently. I was reading in the newspaper, and I mean, it's always in the zone of what Videodrome is about, I think. As a typical example, as Max watches this scene, his attitude is that this is kind of soft core porn. It's really nothing that's very interesting for his cable station, and he wants something more. He's looking for an edge. It's just too soft, etc. Always strikes me funny. We love this reveal in this shot of 3 guys in suits, just bored.
Can we get away with it?
Watching this terrible softcore Asian porn.
I think Oriental sex is a natural. I think it'll get us an audience we've never had before. I don't like it. Not tacky enough.
Not tacky enough for what?
Tacky enough to turn me on.
It's just, I mean, these characters are so great and understated, and the actors are wonderful. I mean, the guy's is not tacky enough to turn me on, and of course, looks like the least likely person ever to be turned on, which is interesting, except for, of course, my character who
Soft about it.
is looking for a different kind of edge.
Looking for something that'll break through, you know, something tough.
Of course, we filmed in Toronto, David's hometown. Before Toronto was the venue for every single American film, television program, commercial, video, MTV, whatever. I mean, now it's Hollywood, at least because of the mismanagement of our governments and our unions. But back then, it was kind of intriguing to have a movie made in Toronto. It was kind of a semi-exotic location. Now it's just business as usual, because our own unions and our own governments can't give incentives that make it possible for us to shoot in the United States, which is sickening, but my own personal opinion, shared by many. This guy was terrific, Peter Dvorsky. He just looks like such a nerd.
Hey, Harlan, huh?
Oh, okay. Here we go.
I'll come through on that. We only got about 53 seconds, so...
Now, you got to understand, as an actor, and Peter looks like a nerd, but he didn't know anything about all this technical stuff, so... you'd always have to ask a question, would you be unscrewing this possibly? Or, you always have to pretend you know what you're doing. I was doing a movie once called Night Moves, and I was playing the mechanic on a plane. And I started unscrewing some nuts and bolts and stuff on the engine during the scene. And then about half an hour later, I saw the test pilot taking the plane up in the air and about to do a hammerhead dive towards the earth. And I went up to the AD and I said, I know I probably shouldn't ask or interfere with the filming. I said, but you do know that I was kind of unscrewing stuff on that engine, right? And luckily, for once they listened to me. Now, this video feed was interesting because David, and this is a Carol Spear issue, and Mark Irwin and David, but one of the things that we talked about were the color schemes involving torture. And one of the things that David had done in research was to find out that orange was the color that is the most offensive to a prisoner. If you're in an orange room, it's a very, very shocking color to the senses. So if someone were kept in a prison that was painted orange, for example, it would be almost unbearable after a while. It's a very, very difficult color. See, right away you want to get a sense that the world is not the way we expect it to be. He already has this clandestine operation. They're pulling in signals or things they don't expect. This was before people even thought about the concept of snuff movies or whatever, translated to video and being broadcast on satellite. It was a very new thing, and yet you look at it over 20 years later, and it was so prescient in terms of predicting the kinds of exploitation that this medium would have. A little overacting there by both of us, I guess. But, we're entitled.
A little nervous, even if you've been doing it all your life, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
When I first met David Cronenberg, I think we basically, talked about, sort of the basic premise of the thing, being linked up with McLuhan. And I don't know. I think it was very sort of casual. It wasn't as specific as one might imagine. I think he wanted somebody who had a very sort of sexual, feminine quality and some kind of ambiguity. And I certainly fit that bill.
Your television station offers its viewers everything from softcore pornography to hardcore violence. Why?
I was interested in playing the character of Nikki because I felt that she was, she was a babe and that she was sort of tough, and there was this huge mystery about her. And of course, what could be better? To be this sort of enigmatic character. The thing that I found out later on, which completely blew me away, was that when we were working on the film and shooting, and every day, Nikki would sort of ask, what is she? Is she on TV? Is she a real flesh and blood person? Well, what is she? And then years later, of course, the name for this kind of character, virtual, came into being. But at that point, the idea of a virtual personality or character did not exist. So every day we were always asking that question. Is she real? Or is she on TV? Where is she?
You know what Freud would have said about that dress.
And he would have been right.
I mean, is she molecular? What is she? She electronic? What's going on? Who is this girl, Nikki?
Listen, I'd really like to take you out to dinner tonight. Yeah,
Professor Oblivion,
What do you think?
do you think erotic TV shows and violent TV shows lead to desensitization, to dehumanization?
The character of Professor Brian Oblivion is obviously based on Marshall McLuhan, who was a pop cultural icon of the time, in that he predicted the notion of the global village, in saying that essentially the medium of television would tend to bring all people together in not necessarily the best way. That is to say, would all have the same pop cultural references, would all understand the same jokes, would all sort of want the same things, would be upset with the same kind of villains that we all shared culturally on television. It's interesting that there's a concomitant reference in Annie Hall in the Woody Allen movie that was, I think, right around this time, maybe a little later, a little earlier, about Marshall McLuhan, where some blowhard is in line at the movie theater in front of Woody Allen and Diane Keaton, Annie Hall and Alvy Singer, their characters. And he's pontificating about what McLuhan means. And, of course, that great moment when Woody Allen brings him out and says, well, I happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here. And McLuhan says, you don't understand my theories. You're completely wrong in everything you say. What we wish we could all do when we have to listen to some blowhard. But at any rate, the point is that Oblivion in this case is presented as a television entity. We don't even get to see him personally. And that is a lovely sort of ironic comedic touch that David put in. Of course, as the plot progresses, we'll find out that there is a reason for this beyond just the sight gag.
Not after I realized the Malaysia delay was a plant.
It's not coming from Malaysia?
You cannot fool the Prince of Pirates for long.
Harlan, where's it coming from?
Pittsburgh. That's in the USA.
Pittsburgh.
Well, one of the things that I find intriguing about this scene is they're talking about the source of the signal of this torture tape. And he finds out, of course, that it's from Pittsburgh, as we've just seen. But already he has become inured to the violence in the scene. The first time he sees it, he's just shocked at this obviously real torture of this woman that is being replayed. I mean, it's a sort of junior version of actually watching a snuff tape for the first time. By the second time, he's kind of casually watching it and discussing its source and is already inured to the violence, which is, I think, part of the underlying theme, if you will, of Videodrome, is that the violence and the power of the video's image can so overwhelm us and completely numb us to its impact that it eventually has a life of its own, which is where the notion of the video flesh, which of course will be coming in the story, comes from.
We'll return to Nikki Brand.
The only real problem, clearly, about making a movie like this and then seeing it 20 years later is having to look at the fashion elements of the time.
Got any porno?
You serious?
Yeah, gets me in the mood.
This scene is the fact that she's wearing
What's this? Video.
something made out of unborn linoleum is kind of interesting in the scene. It's like somebody's flying carpet.
Ain't exactly sex.
Says who?
Debbie Harry was such a great choice for it because she has such a Cupid doll face. I mean, those little sort of heart-shaped lips and the kind of innocent way she talks.
God, I can't believe it.
I'll turn it off.
No, it's okay.
I felt that playing a character that had, a darkness to her was interesting and challenging. I think we all have our dark moments. And I think that
Yeah, it turns me on.
when you're not willing to explore or to, you try to hide things from yourself or from your audience, you're probably doing more harm than good. I think, revelation is really education. And the more that we know, the better off we are.
What did you say happened to your shoulder?
I wasn't turned off by the physicality of it. I thought that, it seemed like totally in keeping with the rest of his films, and that was such a part of his trademark that I was very interested in that. And I've been a fan of that genre for so long that it just seemed like a real golden opportunity for me to be involved in a project like this.
This, to me, is one of the great images of the film, that they are engaged in slow sex, romance, and it's in the glow of a sadomasochistic video that's being beamed in from somewhere. What a mood piece. Nice mood lighting. The torture and murder of an innocent human being while you're making love, and in fact, the making love turns out to be the piercing of her ear, which has a double sexual meaning. The music, I think, is sensational. Howard Shore is truly one of the great composers, but at the time he was almost unknown. Only with David, he's done all of David's movies, I think every one. He is just an astonishing composer. To me, he was almost an electronic version of Bernard Herrmann, who, of course, was the great composer for Alfred Hitchcock, who did a synthetic score for The Birds, and to some degree for Psycho.
Well, I didn't feel uncomfortable being nude. I think as an actor, one has to be prepared to play in all kinds of situations. The only thing that bothered me was feeling like, that I didn't have like the perfect body. I think that's probably the thing that enters, most actresses' minds. I don't have a perfect body. I'm not flawless. I mean, that was the only thing that sort of inhibited me in any way. I didn't feel really uncomfortable being naked. After all, coming from the 60s and being an old, sort of acid freak or whatever, and being a hippie and going to love-ins and marching around and being totally nude in front of hundreds of other naked people. I guess I sort of outgrew the idea of being shy about my body.
Now, you notice as we pull back from the scene, they are now on the Videodrome set. It is a real place in Max's mind. You notice we only go in on Max in that scene, so whether or not they are in that set or he is experiencing their being in that set is up for discussion, and that's the whole idea. One of the things I've always loved about David's work is that it is not beholden to any corporate entity, any artistic expectation, any subservience to the whims of critics or other lesser pundits. He has a vision that is a vision that even he doesn't really understand, that compels him to make these truly they're not just complex films. They're films that deal with an alternative reality that could or could not actually exist. But he loves the idea of the notion of other layers of reality. Every one of his films, there's always something beyond what meets that which meets the eye. So David is not a phenomenologist, if you will. He does not look at the raw experience of visual phenomena and say, well, I've seen it, and that must be what it is. It's not what you see is what you get. It's what you see is a lie, and what you get is always many twisted, ironic, convoluted layers beyond what you think you're going to get. And that, to me, is the most provocative kind of filmmaking, because he really is asking phenomenally intriguing questions and not necessarily giving answers. I mean, David almost eschews the notion of answering these questions. He just loves to ask them. And I think that that's a noble venture, because he asks such bewilderingly complex and provocative questions that I'm kind of glad he doesn't presume to answer them for me, that I can think about them. I mean, 20 years later, I'm still thinking about the meetings of Videodrome. And when I see certain events transpire in modern life, I think, my gosh, that's something that really is a small element that could be a partial answer to some of those very complex and profound questions that he asked years ago.
I don't have the temperament.
But if you did.
Max is, in a sense, sort of Orpheus in the underworld, if you will. He has a way of bumping into the secret lives of characters that he has in his own life taken for granted so far. He deals with these people all the time in this kind of underground world of video and porn and so on. And they're all sort of hustlers, and they all have a product to hawk, etc. But they all seem to have a life beyond what he knew of them. So it's, in a sense, a mystery story. A lot of it it's kind of, in that sense, a precursor to Blade Runner, to Ridley Scott's terrific film based on the Philip K. Dick novella, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And it's the same kind of thing where your character is constantly learning about other worlds that exist from the one that you experience or think that you know about.
Hey, listen to me.
Jimmy wanted the picture to be good. He wanted to be involved in a good project. And so he would, just be real with me, and say, don't do it like that. Do it like this. And he gave so much. It wasn't as if he was sort of acting for himself, that he was, sort of posing. He was delivering. He was giving me something to play off.
Got a cigarette?
I think I've only worked with one or two actors in my entire life that were, somewhere else and that strictly acting for themselves and for the camera. I've been really lucky. And Jimmy was one of the great ones. He really was there and he was emotionally available. There was no misdirection. It was just delivery, point blank, and I think that it says it all. And it actually just clicked. And David really actually was very happy that, my performance sort of finally just got into place. I really sort of clicked in, and I had really just been squeaking by for the rest of it. But he managed to use it. So I was very happy.
See, of course, he's drawn into the world that she is so comfortable in. I asked a psychologist about this kind of relationship when I was doing the movie, and he explained to me that the part of the masochistic experience that people miss is how comfortable masochism is with sadism, and vice versa, of course. I mean, it's the old, you need two to tango. And she is genuinely a fulfilled masochist as a character. He is not comfortable with being a sadist, but he is titillated by both sides of it. All great writing, I think, has a specific challenge for the character. The challenge for the character in this case may be, what is Videodrome? How do I bring it into my business and make myself rich and famous and powerful? At the same time, I'm afraid of what it could be. Will it destroy me? And yet, it's a reflection of a deeper quest, which is Max wants to know what exactly is his desire in life. There are parts of him that are opened up that he never even experienced before. So it's one of those situations where if Videodrome had not come through his life, he may never have opened himself up to these impulses. They may have stayed hidden or controlled or buried for his entire life.
Max, Videodrome is something for you to leave alone.
By the way, my character's name is Max Wren, and I asked David, I said, this is kind of a cool name. He said, yeah, it's a play on words. There's a motorcycle that I always admired called the Wren Max. So I just twisted it around and named the character Max Wren.
Why? But it's mafia. They do business.
Lynn Gorman played Masha, and she was terrific, a really lovely woman. And, she obviously has a second life as a character, this character Masha. There's a hidden agenda.
What you see on that show, it's for real. It's not acting. It's snuff TV.
I don't believe it.
I mean, it was interesting. We had to actually make these violent porn films, but they had to look like they were real compared to some of the other stuff we saw that was so obviously fake, like the original Asian porn, softcore porn thing that Max is not titillated by. And the notion of it was really provocative, I think, for its time, because snuff movies had existed in the 50s and 60s. I mean, talk about them. There was always rumors that someone had gone down to Mexico and kidnapped a girl and murdered her on screen, and rich men would pay to see it or whatever. It was never verified that ever happened, so far as I know. But now the notion that it could be actually seen on television and broadcast was very provocative for its time. The obvious contemporary corollary to it would be if there were snuff internet streaming video. And when you think of how the internet really was created by the Department of Defense to have a way that people could always contact each other no matter what, and in the Department of Defense and through the various university server systems, and the way that it's really impossible to stop someone from broadcasting, I would imagine that there is somewhere on the internet somehow this kind of thing going on. We may not be privy to it, maybe even the most sophisticated intelligence services cannot find it, but I would venture to say that some of that stuff is being transmitted somehow, somewhere.
Yes, Max. It is.
The movie has moved ahead with the times, or moved into the times, or the times have moved into the film. I don't know.
That is the only name I have to give.
I think that David's films really are him. They're about him and about his point of view, and obviously they were about transformation and metamorphosis and weird science and and all that tricky stuff, but done in a pretty serious way, with a humanity involved that wasn't really about something silly, like a lot of the B movies that use some of these, sort of ideas have a certain immaturity and lack of sophistication, where I think Cronenberg's pictures are very involved. There's a lot of emotional depth and a lot of serious stuff going on.
This to me was a hilarious setup in terms of art direction. It was basically a mission for TV junkies. So instead of coming in and getting a warm bed and some food or some soup, you got to come in and watch TV for a while. And they had all these old TVs and these little sort of places. You get a little bit of food, I guess, etc. Have a smoke and sit down and watch TV, because Brian Oblivion believed that it was essential somehow to his vision of the world. It's a fantastic scene. To see all those TVs just flickering away and people sitting in front of them mesmerized by the signal. That was a very Fellini-esque moment to me, just having one of these wonderful faces of the extras just sitting there looking at the television and looking up at that. In Fellini, it would have been a big 300-pound man with a toothless grin looking up at our hero, at Marcello Mastroianni or whoever. Let me name drop here for a minute. I was once doing a film called Once Upon a Time in America with Robert De Niro at the very peak of his fabulous and much-deserved brilliant career. And I asked him about a very well-known movie, and he said, I didn't see it. And I said, oh. And then I asked about another movie that I would expected that he might have seen, and he said, I didn't see that one. And we started talking about movies, and he said, I've never been one to really enjoy movies, or as an audience member, where I kind of know what the third act's going to be. He said, in most movies that are made, by Hollywood, and I think we all agree with this, we kind of know what the third act's going to be. And I think Bob, as an actor, was always kind of inspiration for me in those days, because he oftentimes he could choose any film he wanted. He was the biggest star in the world, and certainly the greatest actor that we knew at the time, and or one of them certainly. And he would pick films sometimes that were very provocative and not that mainstream, whether it was Bertolucci's 1900 or Leone's Once Upon a Time in America or Scorsese's King of Comedy, for example. Cronenberg, to me, represented a challenge. And I have always prided myself on having a career that was not an expected career. I've done a few movies that might be considered standard good studio fare. But by and large, I've been kind of the king of independent, provocative movies as an actor, and Videodrome was part of that body of work and fit in very nicely. Actually, it's in fact a rather, I think, sterling or shining example of what I wanted my career to be, which is films that would have a classic status, that would be enjoyed and revered and discussed and kind of puzzled over for decades.
My father has not engaged in conversation for at least 20 years.
I could probably name 1,000 movies that have been made by studios that were profitable on their first weekends or in their domestic box office runs that you wouldn't even bother to look at now. And yet a movie like Videodrome, which probably didn't do that well when it opened, has become a major cult classic.
Then there have been serious gaps in your education. Videodrome. Mention it to your father. He may want to have a conversation.
Sonia Smits was terrific in this part because she, of course, also has a secret that she is maintaining. I think the art direction was very clever there to put her in a medieval setting, and yet, of course, the issue that they're dealing with is a very modern one. At its time, they were in the most cutting-edge environment of video technology, and videotapes literally had just sort of started. They were as cutting-edge at that time as I don't know, Wi-Fi would be now, or streaming video or whatever.
Something that you don't have, Max. It has a philosophy, and that is what makes it dangerous.
I mean, this is like searching through the subconscious. These are areas of the subconscious that usually don't get into film. I mean, there are painters like that. You'd think more of painters that get into the subconscious the way Cronenberg does. Oh my God. And when I saw Naked Lunch and what he had done with that, I was just flipped. I mean, it was just so gorgeous. What an incredible, he took something that had no linear story and made it happen. It was phenomenal. I think he did a brilliant job with it. And he did get the award from the New York film critics for script on that, which, I think he should have been given much more recognition for that work.
And this is something that came to the office for you by courier.
What did they say at CRAM?
They said that Nicky Brand is definitely not on assignment.
This has a lot of classic sort of film noir elements to it. The missing film noir heroine is now a misperception of reality. All of a sudden, his secretary and Nicky Brand become the same person in his mind, and he thinks he's struck both of them or either of them or one of them and has not done either. He's starting to lose his mind. He's starting to unravel. And that's the first reference to the video flesh, where he starts to scratch his stomach because, of course, the special effects of their time were truly superb. Rick Baker, who has, I guess, won more Academy Awards for special effects makeup than anybody, and is just a remarkable creator of special effects, did all these very, very complex effects for Videodrome. Now, it's so easy to do stuff with computers, but when you think about how hard it was to do them with latex and so on, I always love that picture of the man on the moon holding the photograph that was just taped over where his hand is, because it's a great metaphor for what this film is about, which are the various layers of perception of reality in the Videodrome world.
Will you call me if you need me?
A little unshaven, starting to become a little degenerated. He looks at the video cassette. It now has a life of its own. This is when the film took a turn for either the very best you could imagine in filmmaking or the very worst. If you were really a cinephile and you got David Cronenberg and you like cutting-edge filmmaking, then that was a moment when this film starts to take off. If you were a bit of a traditionalist, you wouldn't have a clue as to what that moment meant.
I think David, he's an outer kind of person. He's an individual, and he's not following a formula. He's creating a formula. So that kind of a director you really have to sort of get with and just, support and be willing to take some chances. I think considering the fact that, he was working within such a small budget, he remained cool and calm and got what he wanted. He's a really good filmmaker.
Therefore, television is reality, and reality is less than television. Max.
By the way, this is a pretty prescient statement about the impact of television and the video image. I mean, now when you can manipulate anything by just shifting pixels around, it's a very compelling philosophical question. Do we experience what we see, or do we manipulate what we are looking at? We can literally manipulate it through the computer. I mean, you can take a still photograph and use Photoshop, for example, and completely change that image and make it undetectable in terms of its transformation. So is he perceiving this murder, or is this murder happening and he is just watching it? I mean, it's ironic that Brian Oblivion is talking while he's being censured and is about to be strangled. This actor was great, Jack, really. He had that complete focus, even as he's talking, as he's being murdered. You're never sure if he's actually being murdered, if you're perceiving that he's being murdered. Is he talking through the murder? Is he completely ignoring it because it isn't happening? Is she the one doing it? Now the television, of course, is talking back to him, and there's Nikki. So now the whole world is completely on its ear. This was the absolutely most compellingly difficult special effect, because now, of course, it'd be very easy to do with computers, but then it had to be done mechanically, and we had to project an image on the television and yet still have the television actually breathe and move, including the screen. And that special effect was extremely complex. Max, of course, becomes fascinated with it, rather than at first he's afraid and then he's completely compelled by it. The veins start to emerge on the television, and it's the beginning of the new video flesh world, the actual world of Videodrome, where video reality becomes video flesh. And of course, her lips, this big luscious lips on the screen, draw him in. But ironically, it's not the sensuality of the lips, although that's something that we can relate to. And this effect was astonishing at its time. I mean, how we got that image on this big, thick membrane that did puff out on its own, and it was projected on it. And it's literally like a big breast as he squeezes it and presses his face into it. It was really, really difficult to do.
Today, Lady Luck may smile on these 4 players and start them on the road to $12,000.
Megan, you have a group of people coming in this afternoon, so tell the staff about that.
Right.
I was about to say this is one of the few shots in the movie I'm not in, that opening sequence there. But in fact, of course, I was at the tail end of it, sitting on the steps.
It bites.
I thought later about the movie, and I realized not only did I work every single day and in every scene, which is pretty unusual even for the lead actor, because there's usually some cutaway to other characters, but I was in virtually every shot of the movie. Even when we did insert shots of, say, the tapes or whatever, almost invariably David would use the insert and then pan up to my reaction or my hand picking it up or whatever. So it was a pretty grueling shoot, because when you work in the United States, Screen Actors Guild regulations give you a 12-hour turnaround, 12 hours off. And in this movie, I only had 10 hours off, and we were working a 6-day week. So it was, let's see, I had 10 hours off, working a 6-day week. And we usually went into severe overtime on the last night, Saturday night. So it was just work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep for the entire time. but it was the kind of movie that's very difficult to make and to get financing for and so on. So you make those kinds of sacrifices. And it was well worth it.
Damage.
The signal induces a brain tumor in the viewer.
We had a great time, even though it was hard, because without having had the script to begin with, that is the completed script, a lot of what we did was kind of brainstorming about what the story would be. And David is, in my experience, one of the few writer-director true auteurs that I've worked with, much like Oliver Stone, by the way, who's also obviously a great writer and phenomenal director, who was comfortable with not only creating his own film, but allowing other people, not just myself, everyone on the cast and crew, to have some input that he would weigh and balance and determine the viability of. This is the moment, of course, when we realize that Brian Oblivion is really a collection of videotapes. But David really was searching for the story, and we became compatriots in that search, and it was a terrific experience to do so. David actually offered me several movies after this, and for whatever reason, usually I was unavailable. I was doing other movies, but I always wanted to work with him again because he was such a great collaborating director. I mean, if this was such a challenge for all of us but particularly for me as the lead character and for David as the creator of the film, the writer-director, to have this challenge of telling the story. What is the story? We were searching for the end of the story as much as these characters were searching for the answers, in particular Max's character. I remember I was living in New York at the time. When the film was over, when we finished shooting, about 4 weeks later, maybe less than that, David called up. He said, "How do you feel about the ending we shot?" And I said, "Well, I never felt completely fulfilled by it. It seems to me," and then we'd start talking, "Well, if he's in Videodrome, but is it really his perception? And should we do this or should we do that?" So he finally said, "Look, we still got the set. You want to come up and we'll just reshoot an alternative ending?" I said, "Sure." So I'd fly up and we'd kind of hash it out a little bit and we'd shoot an ending. And we did that. We did that, I think, 2 or 3 times and finally came up with an ending that we thought was completely consistent and logical, given how tortured the superficial, the subterranean, and the really, truly kind of permeating deep Videodrome reality was in this picture. So there were so many different versions of reality. Now we know where we are because Carol Sperry always had that Art Deco lamp behind us. Remember when I was sitting with Nikki in the first scene, and it sort of pegged where we were. One little touch like that the audience takes for granted is the kind of simple, quiet genius that makes people such gifted artists. In this case, the production designer just had that lamp there so we know exactly where we are and we can start in a close-up and we don't have to show the entire apartment. Now here he is sitting with the gun and this wound is starting on his stomach. This was eventually the most trying special effect for an actor. The Videodrome, what we call slit, the slit in his stomach, the cassette receptor that Max has in his stomach, was an amazing effect, given that there was no computer enhancement in those days. This day was an incredibly difficult day. It was 19 hours. The first 8 hours were the first time that we put on the body prosthetic, and it took 8 hours to do it. And then I had to stand. Actually, I was built into the couch. This is a special set. It wasn't the same set as the apartment. It was a special set just for this shot. And I was actually standing built into the couch on these boxes. I had to stand there for about 7 hours because I was actually built into the couch with this body part. That whole part, that the chest part, when I was sitting down, was built into the couch. Not now. This is now a different prosthetic part. But the part where I was sitting down and first put the gun into my stomach, it was my head and arms, and then the rest of the chest piece was built into the couch, and my legs were below. And they actually had masseuses who were in the basement under where the couch was, because it was built up on a big platform, not the basement of the building, but the subterranean part of this constructed set, who were rubbing my legs for hours so that the circulation would not stop in them. But I tell you, that Sunday off, that was on a Saturday, that Sunday off was the greatest day of my life. It was so trying to stand in position for 8 hours like that. It was almost unbearable. But it was for its day, such an amazing effect. To this day, it still is, actually. And when you consider it was done physically. And of course, to this day, my stomach is still as flat as that, 20 some odd years later, which is another piece of Videodrome reality that may or may not be true. With my little video flesh today, to make my stomach that flat and my muscles that well toned. Oh well. Where's Videodrome when you need it?
He's an intense person, old Jimmy Woods. He's a craftsman, and he is experienced, and he's demanding, and he wants everything to work. You know, he has to make sure that it's not cliched physically. He wants it to read on an emotional level, and he wants it to tell the story in a way that is believable, but not cliched. He's definitely not really into, sort of a formulaic kind of approach. He's not afraid of being an individual. He is an individual. He's not a typical pretty boy or young sort of, he's sort of like from the old school of Hollywood. He's a rugged looking man, and he's very strong. He has a lot of strength. He's also very sexy. He's a sexy guy.
We make inexpensive glasses for the Third World and missile guidance systems for NATO.
He really wanted to have a grasp on this, and it worked for the character, because there really was no way that his character could have a grasp on it, and he was supposed to be completely mystified and shook up by this whole turn of events. I mean, it was unreal and inhuman and everything else. There was nothing normal about what he was supposed to be experiencing, and that did affect his intensity. And I mean, as you go along when you're working on a film, you're usually getting more and more tired anyway. I mean, it can be very strenuous, especially independent films. They can be very long hours, and kind of physically difficult conditions usually.
I love that we're in Spectacular Optics. It's just this crappy little storeroom video place. It's the kind of place you're going to get sort of connectors for your cable when you're knocking off cable from the cable companies, which, of course, one should never do, because they have our best interests at heart, as we know. Try dialing them up sometime and getting a person, a human being, to help you. Now he just coincidentally picks up a pair of glasses and tries them on, looking exactly like a Jean-Luc Godard character. Little new wave element there. I was a big fan of the French New Wave, the Nouvelle Vague, if you will, not only in film but in literature. I mean, Alain Robbe-Grillet and Godard and Truffaut and a lot of the filmmakers of that time, I felt were speaking to the generation just before mine, but they really influenced the ways in which we made films. No longer was it a classic sort of 3-act, get the guy up the tree, throw crap at him and get him back down, model for filmmaking and narrative. All of a sudden, the entire narrative structure was kind of blown apart. I mean, you still had to have some degree of film grammar, but now the storytelling was much more disjointed, much more blown apart, if you will. It was almost either exploded or imploded by the filmmaker, and not just the traditional inciting incident, character reversal, the placing of the obstacle, the fulfillment of the objective, all that kind of classic Sid Field screenwriting, screen structure stuff that is very valuable if you're making, studio films or good industrial corporate product, which we all enjoy, by the way. I'm a popcorn movie guy. I like to go and see those movies where I kind of know the 3-act structure is going to be there and so on. It's a lot of fun. But as a filmmaker, I'm much more intrigued by Cronenberg or, whether it was Lucas or John Cordy or a lot of that San Francisco group, Coppola, a lot of them, they were Spielberg, they were starting to changed the grammar of commercial film at that time. But David was a true auteur. So he was much more to me like a French filmmaker, although he's not French-Canadian, he's English-Canadian. But he was much more like a nouvelle vague filmmaker, a new wave filmmaker.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state after this is all over. If you do, just relax and enjoy.
The helmet, I remember that, Jimmy had sort of, saying, oh, God, I can't, doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. It was some silly helmet that they started out with, and he, kept saying, oh, it's got to look better than that.
It was one of those things where you felt really ridiculous sort of wearing this helmet around, but it pays off. This is Les Carlson, who played Barry Convex. I love that name.
You don't have to actually hurt anybody. You just have to think about it.
I mean, one of the problems with doing special effects in a movie like this is it's not like these things are UL approved. So you put some glowing helmet on your head that has to have these lights that, are actually much brighter than they look. And you have these electrical cords sort of entwining your body. And you really hope that the electricians, didn't have too many drinks the night before. And I can say that because obviously the people in this crew were true professionals. But it's always a little scary. Later on in the movie, you'll see an effect that was something that I really balked at. It was standing in water up above my ankles with cables running through the water to light the television, and I had to stand in the water and whip the TV. And, I remember saying to the electrician, I said, you sure this is safe? I said, because this is before they had ground fault interrupter switches, and it would be a situation where if there was one bad connection, I'd be electrocuted and I'd be in a puddle of water. Nobody could get me out. And I remember the guy said, well, we feel pretty confident about it. I said, well, pretty confident when it comes to your life is not really what you're looking for. And he said, no, I feel confident about it. I said, do you have any kids? He said, yeah, I have a 4-year-old daughter. I said, well, why don't we bring her down here and put her in the water and turn on the switch and see what happens? He said, well, that I wouldn't do. I said, well, of course you wouldn't do it, and I don't blame you. And if you wouldn't do it for her, then we're not doing it for me. So we got rid of the water. The video flesh, the video future, and old Jim's future. Those are the big questions, and old Jim wins every time.
Jimmy Woods is an incredible actor and an incredibly smart person, so that the idea that Cronenberg, who was also a very sort of smart intellect, would end up working with James Woods, I guess it was sort of meant to be in a way.
Well, here we are at last.
My experience at that point was very limited, and I was very much in awe of everybody there, and I really sort of was very demure. I kept a pretty low profile. I guess because the script was incomplete and kept changing, we were all sort of growing into our characters as our characters were growing into the script and into the story. I don't know if I really had a precise method of developing my character. I think that what I did was, in a way, instinctive and simplistic. And I think the story was the powerful element.
I was supposed to be in water about a foot deep right here in this scene. But old Jim decided that it might be a little more prudent not to be doing that, since he liked the notion of having a future, whether it involved Videodrome or not. This is what acting's all about, by the way. Totally committing to the idea of whipping a television set with a whip, standing in an orange torture chamber. Now, it's interesting that in these kinds of stories, and not that there are a lot of them, but
what's going on, Professor?
It's not that there are a lot of stories that have this kind of theme, but the ones that are truly science fiction, sort of combined with Fellini, with New Wave, this entire hybrid of film that David created. The character is always eventually being leached of his morals, of his health, of his psychological health, of his ability to stay balanced and stay stay focused in the world. He starts literally to lose his mind and to lose his health. I mean, we had to progress where he's more and more exhausted, looking more strained, unshaven, unbathed, under stress. Literally, the body is deteriorating as the mind and the soul are under assault from this world that is a part of his own creation.
Speaking for myself, being immersed in a character, it does carry over. It does affect your daily life, and it does affect your thinking. I think that if you're really dedicated to the craft, that this is a good thing and one that you shouldn't be afraid of. And I think that you don't have to be a method actor for this to happen. I think it just happens. And I think that that's why the method became stamped and called the method, because it really existed before it became titled the method. It already existed because it is a natural experience. That's what happens to you. You're involved and you're studying it and you're thinking it and you're trying to make it real, and it pops out at other times. It's just there. And you're living it. And when you're finished with the job, it's over. It just seems perfectly logical and natural.
I mean, this is the classic. He goes to take the picture, and there's nothing in the bed, of course. And we realize that this is part of the Videodrome reality that's eating away at Max's mind. And it's a classic scenario. Every vampire film has the moment where the vampire looks in the mirror, and we see that there's no reflection. And it's virtually the same reality here.
You didn't just want me to shoot your bed, pillows, sheets.
We know it's not going to be there. We already have that film lore in our mind. That film grammar, if you will, is a part of our culture.
Max, are you in some kind of drug warp? I've got friends who can help. Bridie said she came by a couple of days ago.
Did you take Videodrome last night?
Yeah, if it was transmitted, the machine...
I remember he had a terrible cold this day, and you can hear it as he speaks. He was so sick.
Well, fuck you.
And he was really grumpy. I mean, he was very gracious to do the scene, but, he was tired, miserable, and sick. And so his reaction there was a pretty real reaction.
You're right. It's momentum. I'm running like an express train here. I don't know how to stop.
Max, as you remember, in the beginning of the film is looking for that edgier material to make his station the most successful one. And it's a drive that starts with greed and power, and then ends up being a revelation about his inner life that is so damning and provocative and challenging that, in a way, he's threatened with losing his soul, potentially his mind, and possibly his life. Even a shot like that, where you see the glass reflected in the other glass and so on, it's like different layers of reality and perception. Everything that David did. This is an incredibly perfect film noir shot. This is as good art as it gets. This is a total good art shot. This is like Alphaville. Eddie Constantine walking through the world trying to figure it out. There was no doubt that Videodrome was going to be his kind of magnum opus, if you will. He was... he had been doing these odd little movies that probably the distributors thought were kind of B-cult horror films, but in fact, to those of us who were cinephiles, they had a resonance beyond that. And the guy was asking serious philosophical, cinematic questions.
What are you talking about?
It's hard to imagine how many times in a 35-year career I have said, "What are you talking about?" or "What do you mean?" and tried to make it sound like I'm saying it for the first time. What are you talking about? What do you mean? I can't tell you how many times I have asked those two questions in movies. That's the problem when you're the lead actor and you're trying to figure something out. Eventually, you always say, "What do you mean by that?"
Intriguing combination. Very interesting.
Don't let me interrupt.
I think I was saying something like, "What are you talking about?"
I was playing your tapes, Max. Pre-recorded cassettes.
I mean, a lot of the humor of the film comes from the fact that the characters take these preposterous situations so seriously, and that we do play them that way. But it was very easy to do because you always buy into the mythology or the rule structure of any film. For example, if you're doing, I reference vampire films or zombie films or whatever, there are certain rules. You can't have your villain, whatever vampire leader he may be, all of a sudden appear in the naked light of day, because the rule is that he can only exist at night, and if the sun hits him, he dies, whatever. So you have to get around those rules sometime. In this world, because we hadn't finished the script, and because it was so complex and so many layers of reality, it was really very, very difficult to keep reminding ourselves what the rules were of the Videodrome world. And not only was it a Videodrome world, but it was not being broadcast as Max thought. It was actually being promulgated through a series of obfuscations, where these guys are betraying Max with a setup. So, the Videodrome world was actually on tape, but it is possible to take it from people's minds using the helmet, Videodrome helmet. So we had to be aware of that at all times. And yet it was leading inexorably to a conclusion that we weren't really sure of yet. And I think it's a testament to David and to all the other fine artists who worked on the film. And I'm proud to say, I hope a little bit myself, that we sensed where we were going, and that's why a lot of the choices we made were very resonant and logical, given how completely absurd, in the true sense of the word, the Videodrome reality was. That we sort of knew when to take it seriously and when not to as characters, but you had to buy into it. It was really important that we play it as real as these characters, if they were in these preposterous situations, would experience them.
Watch you do it?
I think that Jimmy Woods is the kind of actor who really must have a very mathematical, technical, approach. He's got one of those very sort of logical, mathematical kind of mind. He's not poetic license kind of person. Not to say that he doesn't like poetry, but he does like to really have a real sense of development and how things would be logically. So I know that that's how he works. And I know from being on the set with him that, he was very careful about those things. He really had to feel, this whole underlayering of events that, was very carefully planned out. He really needed that.
That's terrific.
That's another difficult special effect because it was before computers, where all of a sudden the tape comes out and it starts moving in his hand.
Open up to me.
Now, I remember David saying to me, now this was a slightly easier one because the shirt covered the effect, but it was still, 4.5, 5 hours of getting ready for makeup. And David said, okay, we need you to put on the slit stomach and so on. And then there was one other time he wanted to do it, and he knew I hated having to get this thing on. It was just so much work. And he came up to me and he said, okay, so Jimmy, why don't you slip into your slit? And I said, hold on, David. I said, it's like, if you're going to, sell me a bucket of crap, just do me a favor and make sure that you put some roses in it first, and don't try to come up here and sort of just casually think you're going to get away with saying, why don't you slip into your slit? You mean, why don't I take the next 5 hours of my life and have guys gluing and poking? And the worst part of it is when you put that thing on, the worst part is they have to match the color to your own skin texture, which is not as easy as you think, because the latex that they use in those days actually absorbs more light, so it looks more blue. And there was no way to color correct it separately from your own skin. So they have to imagine how much pinker it needs to be so it matches your skin. And they'd sit there with these sponges and this makeup and just dab at you for hours. It's like that, people just sort of dabbing and dabbing and dabbing at you. It's so annoying. You'd rather wrestle alligators than having people sit there with the little sponges dabbing at you. Now, you notice that these are two separate cuts. So we're hoping that this is a situation where some other bugger had to have that stomach on. But I think we do tie it in at one point. That's all special effect there, of course. But a lot of what works with these special effects is how you sell it. I mean, just my reaction to it. to this thing of the tendrils coming out of the gun and joining into my own body, in quotes, this synthetic body that we created with special effects. But that reaction is important. I mean, if I didn't commit to playing how horrible that would be, then it wouldn't be sold. Now there, of course, I'm being tied in, so of course I had to wear the special effects hand and all that stuff. So a couple of hours of makeup just for that one shot of going from my face down to the gun, the flesh gun, we called it.
When I was working with Jimmy and he had the, his hand that became a gun and he had to, reach into his stomach I saw him develop all that. And working on the prosthetics, I had to do some work with Dick Smith, and he made a body cast of me for something, and I went up to his house up there, and actually his house was near Sleepy Hollow. That was kind of a kick. So we, went down into his basement room, where he has all these heads lined up on shelves and big bowls of putty and paint, and it was just a complete dream of a little studio laboratory weirdness, wonderful thing. And up there on the shelf was Linda Blair's head, and I thought, oh my God, there she is. And he said yes, and he was going on and telling me little bits about all of his work, and it's always been fascinating to me, the magic of movies and having all these things come to life.
I love the tone of the character here, where he's completely in another world. You can see that in his mind, he is now committed to an astonishing act of violence that's about to erupt. And this is, again, very prescient, because one of the sad realities of modern life in the world, and in America in particular, is these rampages of disgruntled workers walking into the office place and killing their coworkers. And this was foreseen by David. It's pretty astonishing. I mean, this is a scene that could take place anywhere. And to make the association between television and this act, while it may not be valid, still does strike, I think, an implicit chord in all of us who experience the horror of this violence and the reality of television.
Max, what happened? Are you hurt?
And here we have our hero becoming essentially a mass murderer. So it's, I don't know how Universal felt when they were presented with the final film. But here's their hero now killing everybody.
Get out! Just clear out of here!
The only place where instead of seeing Pepsi or Coke on a machine, you'll see Canada Dry. Because, of course, we are in Canada. Our only little product placement.
It's not really strictly an action film. It's a movie that you really have to watch. And I think that in the sort of genre that it would be existing in, it's not sensational enough to pay off for a general audience, and it's not what a real sort of thinking person would consider going to. This is sort of like a little too freaky. But a real serious thinking person who went to see this, should they, by chance have gone, they would have said, wow, there's so much going on. So I think that marketing-wise was probably a bit of a problem. Yeah.
It wasn't so much that I was aware of the day-to-day nuts and bolts censorship problems with the studio, with the distributors, with the critics, well, all that stuff. But, I mean, it was blatantly obvious to the most casual observer that this would not be, A, an easy sell, and B, very easy to get by whatever self-elected censors might be involved down the pipeline. So, I mean, we knew it was just going to be a nightmare trying to get somebody to accept this film as a viable commercial and cinematic venture. This is not the kind of thing that a studio is going to want to be comfortable with. I mean, I'm not casting any aspersions on the studio. I mean, I don't know exactly what it was they said, but I'm sure they couldn't have been that happy because they thought they were getting a horror film, and instead they got this complex psychological, philosophical treatise, as well as a thriller, as well as a horror film, and a science fiction film. If you're on the other end of this and you're spending millions of dollars, and with due respect to the studios, I mean, they do expect at least to get their money back, and that's a fair, a reasonable expectation. And it's not like we were trying to dupe them or anything, but I mean, they had to know going in that this was a very odd duck of a film, and that it was either going to be the next 2001 and really catch on, or it was going to miss because it was going to really go over the heads of the audiences, or a great segment of the audience, which it did. I think it was actually too sophisticated for its audience. I mean, one of the conflicting elements in this movie that makes it a little different than your average programmer, for sure, is that we do like Max. He is a likable character, and we identify with his being drawn into a world and being duped and then finally kind of co-opted by these evil forces and then forced on some level by suggestion or programming to commit these heinous acts. And the idea that this was seen by David Cronenberg in the early 80s, where people could be manipulated and influenced, I mean, has the kind of reverberation that we've seen now, where people wonder if, you know, the killers at Columbine, for example, were they influenced by violent video games, etc.? And that argument, I don't know the answer to it. I don't know if anyone does, but it certainly is a compelling and provocative argument. And the fact that David sensed that or saw it or predicted it in this movie so many years before, to me, is just
They killed her, Max.
astonishing.
They killed Nikki Brand.
And it's ironic that Nikki Brand is being played by a pop cultural icon, by Debbie Harry from Blondie, and that, you know, she meets her demise in Videodrome, etc. I think Call Me had just come out from American Gigolo, and she was really just flying in terms of her career. One of the nicest people you'd ever meet.
Videodrome is death.
She has a kind of innocence that you wouldn't expect. You know, I thought, you know, you think these rock and roll people are kind of live these wild lives, but in fact, she was a very innocent, very sweet person. I think it's a valid prognostication that the video world will eat itself up. In this world, the constant erosion of your own perception of things and the way you're programmed by the material that comes through that tube. And the stuff that really sells, of course, is the violence and the sex. So we're given a kind of steady diet. And as anyone knows who's only eaten a diet of one thing or another, to the exclusion of the trace elements we need and the variety we need in a diet, you're headed down a perilous road.
I am the video word made flesh.
I mean, this is an odd play on an almost biblical reference here, where he says, you know, I'm the video word made flesh. It's really, you know, the beginning was the Word, and the Word was, you know, with God, etc. And that kind of resonance is a frightening one, because so many practicing Christians in the world, you know, look at the Bible as a source of being something positive, and here it's being co-opted and turned on its head in a world where the video word becomes video flesh, and the video flesh, of course, has no restraints and commits these heinous crimes of murder, etc. David uses those references so that we have those references in our mind. They feel familiar to us when we hear the words. I have to say the double-edged sword of Max's, not so much likability, but his, or appeal to the audience, but his moral availability to the audience. The balancing of that was a very difficult challenge for David and myself, because clearly you want to have a hero that we like or that we want to identify with. And it was important that he be easily embraced by a younger generation. And I don't mean just, you know, as a marketing ploy. It's the nature of this story is that he doesn't want the old, tried and true sort of softcore porn, softcore S&M stuff. He wants something on the cutting edge. And wanting that cutting edge was a kind of metaphor for moral greed, if you will. Like, he wanted to be able to have his cake and eat it too. You know, like, I'm going to broadcast this stuff. I want it to be really edgy, but of course I don't want to go around killing people to do it. But in fact, that's kind of the lesson of the movie. So he was drawn into the dilemma of you can't have your cake and eat it too in the moral arena. And that was an important lesson. And the way it's best told is to have a character we really like and we can really identify with, and we can all say, yeah, I can understand, being a little greedy about money or a little greedy about power or a little greedy about lust. Gee, it'd be nice to be married but have 4 girlfriends, or it'd be nice to be rich and maybe steal something from the other guy, or it'd be all that kind of stuff that decent people don't do. We don't cheat on our wives. We don't steal money from our friends or from other people. We don't do all this stuff. But if you put yourself in a greedy or lustful environment and challenge yourself, there is the scary possibility that you may just kind of creep over the edge. And the way people do it oftentimes is in those subtle ways that are devastating. Well, it's okay to cheat a little on your income taxes because the government doesn't deserve it, is the rationale. But in fact, you are cheating. And then where do you go from there? Well, what happens in this story, of course, is that he tantalizes himself with the possibility of being in this cutting-edge world of sadomasochism and even possibly faked snuff TV, and even in his wildest dreams, the slight possibility that the snuff TV is real. And of course, it's not only real, but so much beyond what he ever expected. It's an entire other universe of experience, and all horrible, finally. And he is sucked into it because of his moral fragility. So it was important to start by liking him and be sympathetic to the fact that all of us are mortal and we could all easily be tempted by Satan. It's kind of a satanic temptation story, and he finally is, and loses his life, his soul, his sanity, and in the process, or not. And the world that we were living in then, in the early 80s, unfortunately seems to have devolved into the more brute and awful version of itself, a more distilled kind of brutality. Now here, instead of being programmed by television in the subtle way of suggestion, the bad guy just literally inserts the cassette into our anti-hero's abdomen and programs him, and that's the end of it. But of course, there's a little reversal here. Now the video world fights back, so Max now takes out the bad guys by using his video reality to destroy the enemy.
See you in Pittsburgh.
It's just so cool. A guy sticks his hand in your stomach with a cassette to try to program you, and you grind it up and turn it into a bomb and blow him up, and then walk through the hole in the wall. There's just there's a tongue-in-cheek insanity to David's work that I just love. It's all logical in terms of the world that we create, but it's just such an ironic sense of humor, and that's what I loved about him. Loved working with him. And of course, every great thriller needs to have that big climactic scene that takes place usually in some big, powerful venue. It's either the fight up in the high rise or, in this case, at a show. And I love that line, "The eye is the window to the soul," because it was so appropriate for this movie.
I've been very fortunate, I must say, that I've been offered parts in pictures that are a little bit risky in a way. They're sort of not mainstream. They weren't mainstream when I shot them. However, the mainstream has a propensity for changing, doesn't it? I think at the time, the actresses that would have read that script in Hollywood probably never would have gotten it. It wouldn't have gotten past their agents. I think we ended up with the Cronenberg script partially because I was familiar with his earlier films, his more independent releases. And I think my agent and my manager at the time, just sort of, they all put their little heads together, and this came up. And it seemed like a really interesting project. And of course, having been a Cronenberg fan, it was very nice. And I sure know you. On this picture, my managers were enthusiastic about it. They wanted me to be involved, but they're always like the devil's advocate, you know, they're always cautious. And so when you start exercising your rights as an artist and sort of going off into areas that seem a little bit chancy, that might not be totally commercial, a good manager is always going to say something about that. It's very rare that, you know, you'd have a manager who would be so adventurous and so creative. I do know, you know, management people that are like that. But, I mean, I see it both ways. I think it's probably better that the artist is the one who's ready to take creative chances and management is keeping an eye on the business. I think that that's really the important balance. I almost had a part in Blade Runner, and they really didn't want me to do that. And I'm sort of thinking, my God, what an idiot I was to listen to them, because it's one of my all-time favorite pictures.
Get the Videodrome! Long live the new flesh!
And this guy becomes, of course, this horrible, infected, strange creature that, you know, underneath this smiling bureaucrat. And I love that moment when the microphone is there and it actually gives that shrieking feedback, meaning, of course, metaphorically, that Barry Convex is getting his own just desserts back, that there is a certain feedback in his own life, but this evil man who's trying to promote the Videodrome, video flesh world ends up being destroyed by it in a certain ironic sense of justice. David is challenging the audience not only on the science fiction level and on the horror level, but on the theological level, philosophical level, sociological level. And those complexities were a real challenge, but they also made the canvas much greater. And the irony is that he did this without a finished script. He felt he could literally shoot his way out of the story. And we did, finally. But the courageous step was that he shot his way out by delivering a film that was not in any way commercially successful, nor was it really finally probably intended to be. I always love that he ends up hiding on a boat, and it's much like Max's life. I mean, he's been wrenched out of his own world and put in a barren world of Videodrome where his whole life has been basically destroyed and changed, and he's a prisoner of this new world that is a bankrupt world, just like this boat is a decrepit hulk and shadow of its former self. And this was the ending that we reshot several times because we couldn't decide if he destroys Videodrome, if Videodrome destroys him, if the video flesh is something that can be destroyed, contained, transmogrified, if it overwhelms us, or if we can finally get rid of it. But here he is in the dregs of the Videodrome world. Studios don't like unhappy endings. This is not a happy ending.
Everyone wanted to do the picture. Everyone wanted to work with Cronenberg. And the idea that things were changing, I don't know. I've worked on enough films now to know that things change. You get new pages. Things happen, especially if you've done any work in television. Television is always being rewritten constantly. You're always getting rewrites. It's not a big deal. I think fundamentally the storyline and the plot remain the same. I think it was just sort of small little tweakings to sort of keep the logic and make it sort of plausible. I mean, he probably could make a couple different versions of the film and it would still be very interesting.
I was hoping you'd be back.
The character of Nikki was supposed to be alluring. I mean, she was supposed to be a trap in a way for him. So that was pretty easy. I mean, it wasn't such a stretch to have to be flirty and nice and sexy, you know, to his character. I think his character was a much more difficult, quirky kind of a guy, really. And was really sort of freaking out by the end. I mean, he really was freaked out because he was losing himself. He was losing his body. Everything was changing. His reality was diminished, and he didn't know if he was ever really going to get it back.
Your body has already done a lot of changing.
That there is another world out there, another reality, the Videodrome world, is really a precursor, when you think of it, to the film series Matrix, about this completely other world. I think a lot of us who were in the film business at this time were influenced by the Gibson novel, Neuromancer. It was the first time that we addressed the notion of a character having a reality that was created through software and through programming that was beyond what the human mind could do, and that was an extension of, and sometimes a domineering element of the human mind, and sometimes a servant to the human mind. I mean, we like to think of computers as being servants to our brains, but there is a time, I'm sure we all fear, when the machines may actually take over. And of course, that was the thesis behind a great film series, the Terminator series. Now here is the final image of our real character Max and the video flesh reality, and they're both there at the same time. So he is being destroyed and elevated into the next realm. Videodrome is destroyed. He's left. Where is he now? Is he in Videodrome, or is he back in his own reality, and was it all a dream? Not a dream per se, but an alternative reality, an alternate reality. And that question, I think, is meant to be left unanswered, because he's just committed suicide in Videodrome, and now that has been done, he's now in his own reality in front of the flame. Flame is, fire is, and always has been a metaphor for a purgative element, that you purge oneself.
Long live the new flesh.
Long live the new flesh. And we don't know what that flesh is. Is that flesh something that we've always experienced, that we know and are familiar with, the flesh of human life in the reality that we've always known? Or is it a new flesh that will be able to survive the death of the human body? And that's a question that, of course, has been asked by philosophers and theologians forever. It's the whole notion of a soul and a reality of heaven, hell on one hand, and present mortal existence on the other. So David's asking some pretty serious questions in a bizarrely metaphorical way, and oftentimes it's the darkest of humorous overlay. But it is finally a film that has held up and had a predictive power that I never imagined at the time, although I knew he was onto something really serious, and it was something I was really proud to do with him.
You know, people love Cronenberg's work, and they're just devoted to him. I get it from all over the world. Everywhere I go, there's somebody will pop up with a Videodrome tape or something, and want me to sign it. It's just totally international. It goes beyond language. It's about modern life. It's about being in this world, the world of TV, the world of television, and there was no name for that. There was no name for that at that point. And that says it all for me. I mean, he created something that there was no name for, and now there is a name for that this was a virtual kind of piece of the world. And so that's why it exists today. That's why people can relate to that, because this is today. It's what we have.